All right, folks, we're doing an interview. This is a rare interview. You actually reached out to me. I'm talking to Dr. Martin Rooke from Harvard. How are you doing, sir?
I'm all good, my man. How you doing?
Great, great. You want to explain to people kind of what you do before we get into stuff and like what your credentials are for everything so people don't think I'm a person who just brought somebody on?
That's fine. Yeah, so I have a PhD in sociology. I look at risk communication, which broadly considers things like scientific misinformation, how science is communicated in the mainstream media. That's what my research was on in the PhD. But since then, I've sort of broadened out into this sort of misinformation sphere, particularly with social media platforms, places like Telegram and things like that.
Mhm.
I've been paying attention to what would be considered to be the far right since about 2014. It started off as a interest in sort of Gamergate, and I've seen it all just evolve until what happened on January 6th. So, any questions, feel free to fire away.
So now with Gamergate, that wasn't something I followed too closely. So what that was they the Gamergate thing came down to a female reporter
Yep.
had a relationship with a game developer, and then she gave it a rave review. Was that not the crux of it?
Other way round. So at the core of it, it was a sex scandal. You had a female game developer, Zoe
Oh,
Quinn.
that's what it was.
She produced this game called Depression Quest, which was essentially a choose your own adventure type
Like
story.
a point and click game.
Point and click, yeah. Well, as the story goes from the Gamergate side of things, she had relationships with multiple men who were sort of in the indie gaming scene. Some of them were games journalists, so industry press type thing, and they sort of gave good coverage of her game in relatively well-known platforms, places like Kotaku and things like that, and people were
Mm-hmm.
sort of going, well, why? Because the quality of this game doesn't quite meet our expectations, what we'd see in this sort of press sphere. So people wanted to talk about it. There was the one of her exes published a blog post, basically saying, yeah, she slept her way into these favourable positions, and people were like, well, do you know what? That's bollocks. We want to talk about it. So they went to places like Reddit and in comment sections and places like that. And those spaces sort of said, you know what, this is starting to lean towards misogyny, misogynistic, that sort of side of things. We don't want it on our platform. So they started just blocking all sorts of communication about it. So
Mm-hmm.
people went, all right, well, we'll go to YouTube. YouTube doesn't seem to mind us talking about this. By now, it's really escalated into a full-blown sex scandal, and it just took off from there. It just hit the right notes. It came at the right sort of time, because just before Gamergate, you had that real big push of sort of pick-up artistry, men going their own way, the
Mm-hmm.
manosphere. So real big questions about men's role and position in society. This also came just after Atheism Plus. You might remember sort of
Yes.
2010, the real big push against New Age creationists on YouTube. So it came at the tail end of that also devolved into a bit of a sex scandal. So there was this sort of uh, field, if you want, of young men really concerned about what's going on in the world. They're seeing massive changes, and they wanted to talk about these things, and YouTube was just the prime space to do it. So you had these people talking about Gamergate, and they started being able to make money from it, and that's the big important thing, because
Mm-hmm.
a lot of these guys were, budding game developers, not earning a lot of money, or they were just blokes sitting in their bedrooms just creating funny videos on YouTube. All of a sudden, their videos are getting hundreds of thousands of views. They're getting the ad revenue, and they go, "Do you know what? I can make a job out of this. I haven't got to work at Walmart or Tesco or whatever supermarket. I can make a living just chatting shit on the internet." And that's what really set it off. So by the end of Gamergate, it sort of evolved into what was broadly known as the anti-SJW, anti-social justice warrior sort of genre, if you want. So
Okay.
really going after feminism, things like that. That died down, and then Trump started his election campaign, and well, that just blew the lid off the whole thing, really.
So the Gamergate thing wasn't that was op-ed, right?
In what sense, sorry?
So I'm saying that was largely like that was an op-ed thing, right? So Gamergate happened, right? There were
Yep.
people who said that this happened. This woman did do this. I mean, and it's also it's your opinion that they gave her a favorable review because she slept with them, right? Like there's no way of proving that. She happened to sleep with these people. They happen to give her favorable reviews. You happen to not like the game. So it is kind of this op-ed thing where everything kind of exists in this nebulous place, right? Now, maybe those guys were trying to rile up the guys who were already starting to feel a little disenfranchised, right?
Ah, I forgot one important bit of the story that really pushed it.
Mm-hmm.
So there was one particular date where all of these games journalism outlets all published articles roughly saying the same thing, and that was gamers are dead. The gamer identity, the young straight white male identity doesn't have to be your audience. So gamers are dead. Find a new audience. And so all of these blokes sitting on YouTube went, what on earth is happening here? Why is the game industry or the gaming press turning against us? And how
Mm-hmm.
comes all of these articles were released on one day? Is there some sort of collusion going on behind the scenes
I see.
between these journalists alongside the sex scandal as well? How deep does the corruption go? And they really pushed on it.
But how much of that could have, I mean, like, I don't know. Maybe you know more examples, but it's like, wasn't you're saying 2004, right?
2014.
2014. Now, does that coincide with the push of mobile gaming and freemium apps? Because that's why people were talking about that. Like there was it IGN mates named Steve Jobs the most influential man in the history of gaming around that time? I remember thinking it was ridiculous just because, but so many people use their iPhone to play whatever video slots or whatever that he's technically created more video game users than any other person.
Yeah, you're very right. And one of the big pushbacks against this sort of straight white male gaming identity or gamer identity was the argument that actually about 50% of gamers are women because women play a lot of mobile games.
Mm-hmm.
So you had those hardcore gamers going, but that's not a real gamer. A real gamer likes their Call of Duty, likes their Tekken, likes their sports games. They don't play Candy Crush. But you had the gaming press going, no, actually, these sort of, Karens, as we call them today, these Karens who like their Candy Crush, they're real gamers. And that, again, was just another dig at this identity and just carried on the controversy.
Well, that's the thing because you're using it now. You're just playing at that point. You're playing semantic games with language, right? It's what these
Mm-hmm.
guys have considered as because I remember years ago being like, oh, I was thinking about getting a Wii or something 10 years ago, whenever the Wii was big. And I said it to my buddy Rob, who's a huge video game guy, and he goes, that's not for serious gamers. And I was like, yeah, dude, I haven't owned a video game system since you could bootleg Marvel vs. Capcom on Dreamcast. Like, I just want to like play
Yeah.
Wii Sport. Like, I have a Switch in the house. Like I have an old Xbox that somebody gave me. I don't have a problem playing 10-year-old video games.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's just a kill time for me personally. Like whenever I'm fucking around, like it's like, so, but it's like those guys took that as an assault on their identity. And you're saying that that's kind of a big part of what
Big
kind of
part of
grew
it.
into the anti-SJW movement, which I think has merit. It's just some of these extreme portions of it.
Yeah, well, don't forget as well. Going back to the sort of pushback against evangelical Christianity and things like that. At the same time, there was this very big focus on complex scientific approaches to understanding the world.
Mm-hmm.
So facts and logic, and you might remember the old adage from Ben Shapiro, which was facts don't care about your feelings. So at the time, there was this real big rational focus. So when you had a lot of women and some men as well sort of saying, well, do you know what, I'm a feminist, I think the patriarchy is a real big problem. That then gave these people ammo to go, but you're not viewing the world rationally and you're not viewing it factually. You're viewing it through this social justice lens, and this is a problem. As I said, you had the pickup artist manospheres type of thing, and a lot of their focus was on really understanding female psychology and how to, I say manipulate, but manipulate women into having sex with you. They were saying, hey guys, You're young men, you want to get laid. Every young man wants to get laid. I will teach you the tips and tricks of how to pick up women at a bar. You know that you're not a looker. I know you're not a great looker, but you don't need it when you have my product here of how to sleep with women. But what we have seen, or what I've seen anyway, is that real complex, rational, scientific understanding of the world has fallen away completely. And even in that sort of right-leaning sphere, if you want, we're starting to see a lot of focus on mythologizing and storytelling and trying to understand the world through that perspective. You know,
Now, has that okay? So that's kind of where I come into things. Is so I understand. So when it comes to the rational thinking aspect of things, that's kind of where I lean. And it's
mhm,
like when people start extrapolating into emotional feelings, like, I mean, whatever. So when Joe Biden, when they announced his, I live in a fairly diverse neighborhood, right? When they
yeah,
announced that he had won the election, there were people screaming in the streets. I'm sitting outside with a friend of mine, and I look at him and I go, these people are cheering for the man who wrote the most racist piece of legislation post Jim Crow. Like, this
mhm,
is not, like, you may think he's better, but this isn't worth celebrating. Like, you understand what I
yeah.
mean? Like, you may think he's better than Trump, but this is not worth celebrating. And this person looked me in my face and said, you don't have empathy for other people. Do you not hear that? Do you not feel that? And I go, that does not matter. And it does not absolve Joe Biden for destroying a generation of black men.
Problem is though, Chris, you're thinking about this logically. Think of it like a wrestling show. You know,
Mm-hmm.
Joe Biden has just done a baby face turn. People love it. You know, Donald Trump was the heel. People love that. And that's the thing, to view it rationally. There's only so far that rationality can take you, and that's where my field of risk research really comes into it.
Mm-hmm.
So 1969, I believe it was, a nuclear engineer by the name of Chauncey Starr wrote and published this article, and basically he said, you know, we as nuclear engineers know that nuclear power is the safest form of energy, right?
Mm-hmm.
We know this. This is something that is the nuclear energy community accept. Why is it then that the public are terribly afraid of nuclear energy? And he basically asked the question in the paper is, how safe is safe enough? How safe do we have to make nuclear technology before people accept it? And the field of risk research has painstakingly
Mm-hmm.
gone through all the sort of psychology of things and have come to the realization that people generally tend to live tribal lives, and anything that is presented to them, they view it through their own lens and filter that information through their own sense of social values.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the big studies was done in 1995 in Detroit, and what Paul Slovic did and his team did was basically just ask people, you know, how dangerous do you think this is? And they gave people a list, and there was stuff like, you know, X-rays, flying in an airplane, motor vehicles, and street drugs, right? Big list of stuff. And what they found was very interesting. In the
Well, none of those things are particularly dangerous. Let's just.
Well, X-rays, no, but what and street drugs, yeah, probably. You know, it depends on who you are and your perspective of those things. But
Mm-hmm.
what they generally found, typically found, was that white men tended to rank everything as being far less dangerous than white women, black men, and black women. So there was a difference in perception of risk. So even things like X-rays. Men tend to view them far less risky. Women, black men and black women, tended to view them as being far more risky. So there
Mm-hmm.
was this demographic shift in how people viewed things as being dangerous, except for when it came to motor vehicles. Now it's very interesting because both black men and white men said, no, cars are not dangerous at all. They're very much not a problem. Whereas
Mm-hmm.
both black women and white women went, yes, actually, we view motor vehicles as being very, very dangerous. So that
Well,
started.
we all know what that comes down to. Come on.
But that's the thing. At the time, there was a big question of, but why is that? Well,
Mm-hmm.
why is there this gender difference? Why is there this racial difference? And so the field of risk research sort of broke away from even psychology and started asking more society-based questions. And yeah, there is some things that say, women have to look after, women look after children, they have their maternal instincts,
Hmm.
they're sort of prone to view things as being more dangerous, whereas men more risk-seeking, especially in combative terms and stuff like that. So it's gotten to the point now, at least in the field, where we're starting to ask, well, how do institutions, media platforms, media stations, how do they manipulate the information in order to present a hazard as being more risky, which is risk amplification, or less risky, which is risk attenuation? And
Hmm.
so, for example, I could just say Donald Trump's wall, and some people will go, yeah, that would have protected America from uh, Mexican street drugs, Mexican opioids coming over the border. Whereas some people go, actually, no, we view this as absolutely dangerous. It would mean more riskier border crossings and things like that. So even just something like the wall brings up so many different perspectives on how dangerous something is.
Hmm. Okay. So you guys research, and what's the name of the project again that you guys are working on?
The Technology and Social Change Project.
Okay, so you guys are focused largely on what's going on with misinformation on Telegram, right?
That's what I'm focusing on. We've got other members of the team who focus on sort of digital rights issues more broadly, privacy
Okay.
rights more broadly, other platforms like Twitter, Facebook, all sorts of things on the go.
Okay, but when it relates to this, like you sent me a graph the other day of just the amount of time since January 6th, things like white genocide, and these are, and this is kind of comes back to what we were talking about before, where you said that like these are people who started off as rational thinkers that have become irrational, because there's no reason to think that there is a plot for a white genocide other than maybe some fringe people on the left have posted memes that white women should not be impregnated by white men. And those are also very fringe people. The
Yeah.
average Democrat, well, it's like, and so now this is building, and you're saying that this probably has obviously contributed to Charlottesville. It's contributed to January 6th. It's in this feeling of overall fear in society,
Yeah. So
at
one
least
of the
for these particular white men, right?
yeah. I mean that's my big concern. This sense of radicalization of well, white men, this sense of people started off having quite legitimate concerns about government, about the sort of wider neoliberal shifts, about can I own a house when I get older? Especially for Zoom, can I own a house now at the age of 40? Is this something that's now being blocked off to me because of this global economic system that we live in? So very legitimate concerns,
Mm-hmm.
but they are being supplied a very steady stream of content by people who always are one step down the sort of extremism ladder.
And also
You can go from
people who are extreme because they do, I do believe a lot of these people believe what they're saying. But like when I see a meme that says somebody like, there's a weird thing that goes around often that boomers could all own houses with a minimum wage income, but probably in the not in the most desirable places in the country. They couldn't all own houses in Beverly Hills, so it's all being shared by people in major like, so whatever. I bought a house this year,
yeah,
140K,
nice, well
right?
done.
Yeah, it's a rental property. I just make rent off of it. The mortgage is $800 a month. If
Yep.
you rented out the top apartment and you had minimum wage, even with an FHA loan, you could put like 10 grand down on a house like that. You could own a 2-family house and you can more than pay for that with minimum wage. So it's like, I don't understand where the irrationality comes from some people. Are they just not actually, it drives me personally nuts because I'm like, are you not looking at this?
Well, that's the thing. It's not that they're not looking at it. It's that stories like yours don't get told. You don't hear of the person who did put 10 grand down on a house, flips it as a rental property, and was able to move and progress.
Hmm.
You know, disaster sells. Disaster sells newspapers.
Hmm.
Disaster sells in the social media content realm. And it goes back to what I was saying at Gamergate. You got these people who realize that they could make money. They've got into this sphere, if you want, of catering information for right-leaning individuals who are a little bit concerned about some aspects of society, and they just hit them again and again and again with, this is how terrible life is, this is how terrible your life will be, you will never succeed, and the reason for that is, and then it depends on who you're listening to. You'll get some people say, well, it's the politicians who's the problem, and then a few steps down the extremism ladder, you end up at, actually no, it's all a Jewish conspiracy to keep the goyim down.
Hmm.
But those sort of small success stories are never really told. The only sort of success stories you get are things like Donald Trump and those sort of massive multi-million-dollar successes. But yeah, the sort of small successes are never told, and it's this idea that small America is dead, dying, and gone because of globalism.
Hmm.
But of course, the big question there is, well, why has that happened? Who allowed that to happen? Who do we blame? Whose fault is it? And again, these content creators, if you want, they have the answer. But the thing is, they've got to keep up with the times, and they've got to keep the focus on more radical answers to the world. Take, for example, Alex Jones, in his recent court case, he says that actually no, he's moving away from telling news, and he's focusing on more spiritual conversations.
Well,
And
he's
that
been
Matt,
to interrupt you. Sorry, he's been doing that for a while because he had to basically he pulled the Jerry Springer defense to keep being able to see his kids.
yep,
So that was a few years ago. So Alex Jones is like, but here actually, while we're on the subject, I want to bring it back to you because Alex Jones is pretty important in what I want to talk about. So post 9/11, this is an interesting thing when it comes to disinformation. I don't think that these people are continuing to move the needle necessarily. A lot of them are rehashing old things. And it is this interesting thing. And that's why I brought up, I don't think people are paying attention. So I had somebody say to me something about COVID and FEMA camps.
hmm,
And like it was a right-wing person, and they were kind of saying that this all ends, the COVID passport, all this ends in FEMA camps. Now I remember that narrative post 9/11 from Bush, not from like a Biden or a Fauci. Like I remember that, and I'm like, I made the joke because I thought everybody remembered that conspiracy theory from 20 years ago. So I made the joke. I literally go, just like government construction going over time. You know what I mean? They've been building those FEMA camps since 9/12. And
yep.
fucking people were like, what are you talking about? I was like, you didn't read that 20 years ago? And they're like, no. And I'm like, we're the same age. It's not like this is a child.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I've noticed as well in my own sort of social networks. Back in 2014, I was listening to people say, "Oh, I've had enough of this feminism stuff. I've had enough of this diversity stuff," and that was very much isolated to this very small little community of Gamergate. But now I'm starting to get friends who go, "Do you know what? I don't understand why every advert there needs to be a black man and a white woman." And they're spotting these little things that were small community issues, yeah, about sort of 10
And
years ago now.
and that's not even like that's like a weird I'm knowing guys who are just kind of like, yeah, like I'm not playing, like I know guys who are like outwardly presenting like woke on social media, like woke, like people of color who are
Yeah,
kind of just like, some of this trans shit's a little much. You know what I
mate,
mean?
I've got gay uncles, and when we were sitting around the dinner table, and one of them was like, "I don't understand what this queer thing is about. When I was young, being queer was an insult, and now people are taking it on. Why would you want to be queer? Just be gay." So people are getting very much fed up with it, and they're seeing it, and people are starting to want to go to the internet to say, do you know what, I've had enough of this, and they're finding that their conversations are being moderated, they're being banned from places. As I was saying, when you look at the far right misinformation network on Telegram, January 6th saw the biggest increase in users in that network than I'd ever seen.
Well,
Because
how big was the spike after they had put up those Hunter Biden videos 2 weeks ago?
uh,
Because I
well,
didn't have Telegram until I found out I could watch Hunter Biden get his dick sucked on Telegram. I'm not even going to pretend I did.
No, it's fine. But no, little things like that, they don't really move the needle. You need big things like
Like
Jan
January
said.
6th.
And I haven't looked at the data yet, but I would speculate that the raid on Mar-a-Lago or the execution of the search warrant, that would also move the needle, because what has also happened is internet users have generally gotten older. So whereas 10 years ago the internet was a sort of millennial and young Gen Z type thing, it was still very cloistered. What we're seeing now is, your mum and dad is on Facebook. So over the past 10 years, there's been a great onboarding of the older Gen Xers and the boomers, but now they've even gotten to the point where they feel comfortable leaving Facebook, leaving Twitter, leaving YouTube, leaving those big Web 2.0 systems that attracted them online. So they're more willing to go to places like Telegram, like Truth Social, like Rumble, because they want to start using the internet now rather than just having a app that gives them the information.
Okay, so let's break down. We've talked a lot in the last minute or two, but let's just let's go back a little bit. When we were talking about the people getting fed up with stuff and finding these places, how much do you think that these people are kind of being, so like, let's put it this way: black guy, white woman in a commercial does not matter. That's not an important thing that we should ever be talking about. Like, no one should care about that, even a little bit, right? However, there are these things that come out. Like, there was the museum in Washington, D.C. that put out this thing about whiteness, where it was just like being on time is a sign of whiteness, which is bad. Like, so it's like these are arguments that we should be having, but these arguments all get lumped together, and we can't have them broader socially because they are taken off. Like, you are considered, if I point that out to somebody who's on the far left, if I go, hey, look, read this. This is a little much. And I don't think we should be teaching, like, here's the thing. Kids should learn about slavery. Kids should not be learning, like, 5-year-olds should not be learning concepts of privilege on a broader emotional thing. They don't have broader emotions. Their emotions are candy and school. That's it. You understand what I mean? So it's like, that's a debate we should have civilly. Like, look, there is a debate to be had about child drag shows. There is no debate to be had about gay marriage. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, but these things, where is it? Okay, so what is the correlation? I'm kind of asking you, what is the correlation between these people being pushed further and further into these kind of crackpot ideas that ends with Jewish conspiracies, right? And what is the correlation with that? And just kind of being like, hey, this seems kind of funky on like an actual thing that I think even we can both agree, like some of these things, I don't think we talked about this on Notes of a Goon a couple of weeks ago. I brought up a video from PBS about library drag story time at a public library. And I go, so now here's the problem with this. And I play the clip, and it's a bunch of the Proud Boys yelling gay slurs, right? And then I go, okay, that's a big problem. And then I go, let's play some more of this. And then it's literally the reporter going, well, why do you think these guys are doing that? And they go, they just hate gay people. I'm like, I don't know. There's a huge jump between I don't think there should be drag queen story hour, and now the Proud Boys definitely hate gay people. But I think there's a debate, and I don't think the drag queen story hour is a big deal, really.
Yeah, what you're touching on there is known as the dialogic model of communication. You got two big approaches. So generally, it's believed that people who hold ignorant views, let's say, they are just simply not aware of the correct information. That's known as the oh, the name escapes me now. The deficit model. These people are just in a knowledge deficit, so therefore if the media systems give them the correct information, they'll reach an enlightened perspective.
Mhm.
That's the deficit, and that comes out of science communication
What's
thinking.
that called?
The deficit model.
Okay.
uh, but what a lot of risk research has demonstrated is actually no, the deficit model doesn't work in science communication, because what you do is you totally ignore the underlying socio-political issues.
Hmm.
One big case in the UK was there was a real big pushback against cell phone towers,
Hmm.
right? They were putting up cell phone towers and people were really concerned about them. And there was, direct action to knock these cell phone towers down. So the deficit model approach would be, well, no, we just need to tell these people that that cell phones are, not risky. They're not going to give you brain cancer. They're not a problem. Until you start realizing that actually they were starting to wanting to put cell phone towers on top of schools, and people went, no, you're kind of taking the piss here. So that
Okay.
was where the dialogic model comes in, because they got all the stakeholders there to sit down and say, right, what is your problem here? What don't you like about cell phone towers? And they went, we just don't want them in our schools. Like, put
Okay.
them out in the field, put them away from people. We just don't want them here. And that's what we're seeing a lot with the sort of far right stuff, is when you look at it, there is a legitimate concern somewhere. And it's just being able to find what that concern is and actually represent that within the media discourse. Because as you said, a lot of the focus seems to be, well, these people have a problem with X. That's because they are homophobic, they are racist, they are anti-Semitic, they are all of these buzzwords. At the same time, you've got an entire media ecosystem existing that will serve them those narratives they want to hear, that will
Hmm.
say to these people, hey, do you know what? We agree with you. We agree that yes, this is a problem, and here's why it's a problem.
Hmm.
So the actual mediated discussion, the calm discussion about the problems and what should happen in a deliberative democracy is deliberation. People
Hmm.
should talk and communicate and present their facts and sort of present these things. That doesn't seem to be happening for very specific issues. But then, like I said, there's people sitting there saying, but I've got the answers. And going back to what you were saying
There's
about,
people
your,
saying essentially, hold on. There's people saying essentially, you're not crazy. Come here.
yeah,
And then they
you're
kind
not.
of now they have you. And I want to talk about this because I saw this with Trump. I blame the media coverage for January 6th as much as I blame Donald Trump. The
Mhm.
media coverage of Donald Trump for 4 years led to January 6th because
Yeah.
you had millions of people who felt that the only person who was telling them the truth was Donald Trump.
Well, it's not just that, it's the comparison as well between the media coverage of Donald Trump over those 4 years and then the converse coverage of Joe Biden. For 4 years, you had mainstream media, really questioning Trump's mental state. He's a madman. We should impeach him. He's a narcissist. We should impeach him. Very big concerns about Trump's mental state. And then Joe Biden comes on the scene, and he does seem pretty senile, but no one wants to question Joe Biden's mental state. That's sort of not a discussion that's taking place. There's no calls in the mainstream media to say, do you know what? Maybe we should kind of impeach Joe Biden here, because we do have questions about his mental state. So people are seeing those major differences in the conversation, and they're sort of going, well, why is that? And going back to what you were saying about the FEMA camps after 9/11 and people not quite realizing that that's been in the works for however long, once people start figuring things out and wanting to look for this information, there is this sense of revelatory discovery to all this. It's a sense of actually how deep does the rabbit hole go, and that in itself can be quite addictive,
Mhm.
or at least that's my opinion, that it can be quite addictive and really pushes people to hunt and search for new information. And then you start coming across very manipulative influencers who would say things like, do you know what, I may be wrong, but at least I'm not lying. What a great cop out that one is. That enables you to pump anything you want out, and if the second it's proven wrong to you, you go, hey, I'm not lying to you like the mainstream media does. You can trust me. I'm authentic. And it's that sense of authenticity as well. Very, very resonant at the moment. Because again, people do not trust the mainstream media. Major questions about funding, who's in charge of what goes out in mainstream media.
Well, even beyond that, I mean, and this is an interesting thing to me. And I want to talk about this when it comes to, so I've said this, and it was kind of like this weird thing where it's like people on the left don't know about some of these like anecdotal examples that of CRT in schools or something like that, right? And they don't know about it because they're not seeking them out, right? So they don't know that these things even exist. They're like, that doesn't exist. And you show them examples and they kind of go, okay, that does exist, but it's probably not that big of a problem. But they didn't know the existence of it. And I think that kind of goes back to, I've been saying this since Donald Trump became the president. I'm not a fan of Donald Trump. I grew up working in a restaurant. Once he came out and said what he said about South American immigrants, I could never be a Donald Trump supporter, right? It's just not the way it would ever, it could never go down for me that way. However, I did start noticing a lot of very broad falsehoods in reporting. So like when he first became president, there was a bunch of articles came out that just said 95% of the State Department resigns in anticipation of Donald Trump becoming president. Now, I, as somebody who thinks with my brain, I go, I wonder if that just happens whenever there's a new president, because they were hired by the old president with those views. So I looked it up, and it turned out it was very common. However, I saw that article shared 50 times on Facebook by people in their 30s who should have rational thinking minds, but they wanted to be panicked about it. And then, so once you, and here's the thing is like that article took place in several different places. You saw it, and you'd start to see these things pop up with like statistics being misused in any number of websites and any number of news sources. And you kind of start to go, okay, well, this is pushing these people's narrative. And if I disagree with it, I'm anti-facts. But it's like, this is false. And it's like, so now I'm getting to the point where I'm constantly defending Donald Trump despite disliking him. Because even like when it came to the trade war in China, this has been a problem. And this was caused by, in my opinion, largely caused by, like, we never should have let China into the IMF. And that was started by the Clintons and kind of like fostered through the Bush era. And we never should have done that. But it was like people were talking about this trade where I was like, well, there's a lot of problems with intellectual property theft in China. And just in general, just like there's a lot of arbitrator cases that aren't going through. And people going, where'd you read that? I'm like, The Economist 10 years ago. Like, this is not a bad thing. It's just people are talking about it. And like the amount of people who would come out and be like, well, tariffs are secret taxes. I was like, you didn't say that to all the other tariffs that exist. Like, it's just like, and it's like, I think people just, and I think, so again, like I said, I found myself constantly defending Donald Trump, and not even like I'm defending Donald Trump. I'm saying this is business as usual.
Yep.
I'm anti-business as usual. But I'm just saying, I'm like, you're freaking out for the wrong fucking reasons.
But the thing is, business as usual does not sell news stories, and this is a major issue with the mainstream media. So as part of my PhD, I interviewed quite a few British journalists, science journalists, right? So one of my first interviews, it was an old boy that I was interviewing, and I quite naively said, so tell me, how in your career do you think you helped improve the public understanding of science? Right, and he stopped me, and he, in a very gentle British way, was like, let me stop you right there. My job was never to improve the public understanding of science. My job was to sell newspapers. Boom. That blew my mind at the time, because I didn't even think that, actually these people who are writing these science news stories, they've got to impress their editors. There is a financial motive behind it. Now,
New study finds is the #1 clickable thing. If you're in a time with very little civil unrest, not a lot of war, no polarizing political candidates, new study finds exactly what you want to hear, or the exact opposite of whatever you want to hear, is the most clickable link outside of an aberration.
Yeah, but what really messed journalism up was moving to online. online publication absolutely destroyed journalism because they just struggled raising revenue. So what a lot of my interviewees were saying to me was that there's always been a time pressure in journalism. There's always been a time pressure to produce your stories, but since moving online, that pressure is now immediate. You are laser focused on being the first person to get a story up. What also then happens is they've got to churn out several stories in a day, right? So what are you going to do? Are you going to sit there and take the time to phone up an expert who might say, oh, actually, no, you got to phone this other person? Or are you just going to click on a press release that's produced that has all the information that you need? It's got your graphs, it's got your statement, it's got how can we change policy to address this issue. Just retype that up, 500 words, 1,000 words, news story, hit send, work on the next one. And a lot of my interviews are saying that journalism is absolutely devastating journalism at the moment. And beyond that as well,
Would you call it churnalism?
journalism, just the idea of churning out news story after news story based off of press releases and things like that. And journalists have got press releases coming in from all over the places, universities, non-profit organizations. Everyone's producing information for journalists, and so when you've got to write several stories a day, you just go, okay, I work for this publication, I know what sells to the people, what will get them to click on specific things. Donald Trump got pissed on by Russian hookers. Boom, that's a story right there. Okay, let's move on.
Well, we did a story last week. We did a story last week. It was a CNN story where the headline was, I believe, entire North Carolina Police Department resigns after Black woman becomes new town manager. And they like the whole first 5 paragraphs were like, is this racially motivated? And then in the 6th paragraph, it goes, well, some people don't think it's racially motivated because the last town manager was also Black. It's in the 6th paragraph.
Yeah.
So now in order to find the actual information, you have to scroll through 2 full pages of side ads.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the thing. They don't expect people to do that. It's a headline economy. Clickbait titles have been a thing on YouTube for however long, and it's also a thing in journalism. So you've got your headline, which, okay, granted, headlines are not normally written by the journalists themselves. They're normally written by the sub editor. But then you've got your lead and your first few paragraphs. That's to sort of get the message across, and then you start adding the context. And that's always been a thing in journalism. It was called editing, cutting from the bottom. But the problem is, well, the thing is now, news isn't presented in a physical paper. So journalists have virtually unlimited space to add as much information as they want. So they'll bury that stuff a lot further down because they've already sold their story by that point.
Okay, yeah, I've actually talked about this a bunch. Like back in the day, I remember being taught how to read the newspaper. Freshman year of high school, New York Times, they go, hey, look, if you're following a story, because they were like, you have to read the newspaper every day. And we're like, how the fuck are we going to read this all every day? And I remember the teacher going, no, you don't have to do that. You read the first paragraph, right? If you've already read this main article from the day before, the first 2 paragraphs should be all the new information since yesterday on this subject. If you're reading about, say, the Iraq War. And it's just not any. It takes a long time to find any information in any news article that isn't a print news article. I still get, that's why like people will always give me shit. Like it's like whatever you think about the biases in The Economist, they have a certain amount of space per week. I'm getting the information in a page. You know what I mean? So it's like, and that's why I do that. And it's like my buddy Dave always says, he's like, you will get more news from 1 hour of the PBS NewsHour than 24 hours of CNN in any given day.
Yeah, and I mean that's why things like podcasts are really taking off, because it is that long form content that people can listen to and just spend the time with. But as we were saying, there's just this branch of society that's not being catered to by
mainstream news.
Well, not even mainstream news, just responsible journalists. Who sort of really want to focus on the balance, who really want to get the issues across. But okay, maybe responsible journalist was a me misspeaking, because there are pressures, there are definitely pressures on them. But the other side of things is as well, don't forget that there is an entire generation now that sort of what in their 30s of generation of millennials and older, who when they were growing up, all of the media manipulation was done by the right,
Mhm.
especially
It's
around
fair.
the war on terror. Not finding weapons of mass destruction was one of the biggest hits to trust in US institutions ever, and it's called organized responsibility, but that's neither here nor there. But there was big questions about the Koch brothers funding media, about advertisers funding media, and as we were saying as well about evangelical Christians really buying out school districts and things like that. So that was sort of a formative era for a lot of people,
Mhm.
and so there's a sense of that has never gone away. That there are these right wing institutions that
Sure.
are just waiting on the outskirts to pounce and sort of take back America, quote unquote.
But there's a weird analogy now where you're getting some of, like, it's not evangelical Christians. It's not the Koch brothers, but it's Jeff Bezos and fucking people who are like evangelical in their thoughts on social justice, right? Like, so it's like it is these people who are pearl clutchers and the very wealthy on the other side, and they're kind of creating this feedback that I don't think it's like I got into an argument with a friend recently about January 6th, and he literally said the words, "There is a white Taliban being created in this country of angry white men, and you can't, if you say anything that even relates to anything that these guys are saying, you are on their side by giving them any credence." And I literally was just like, dude, I did not other brown folks in the Middle East after 9/11. 9/11 was worse than January 6th as far as I'm concerned. I'm not gonna do it to white guys in the Midwest now. Like, I'm just not doing it. Like, and it's like there's this one-to-one almost like allegory with what they're doing, and it's the war on terror all over again, just turned inward, and it's bizarre, and I don't, and it's going to make it worse. It took 12 FBI informants. What was it? Was 12 FBI informants to get 14 guys to talk about kidnapping the governor?
Yeah.
That's And there's very little talk about that, and it's like kind of like, guys, that's bad. Like the FBI and the
Yeah.
CIA are bad. Like they sold coke in LA in the 90s. Like, let's
Yeah, I mean that's the thing as well, especially after the FBI raid. It's a question of people are going, well, FBI agents are being threatened. And it's like, yeah, FBI agents have been threatened for
forever.
however long. The CIA, you had Edward Snowden and people like that who are willing to go to prison just to demonstrate, how insidious the intelligence agencies can be.
Mm-hmm.
But no, you're right. There very much is this tribal approach to it, and the thing is, people seem to have forgotten the lessons of the war on terror. Again, I remember a lot of the Islamophobia and a lot of the big focus on, Muslims are really bad people. Muslims are, even here in the UK, Muslims are coming over and they're going to radically change your society. And, there
They
were
really just came over and sold tasty food. Like
well,
if
even then, for the most part, yeah. But even then, yeah, you did have a few men who did plan terror attacks and
sure.
did plot things, and you go, well, fuck me, no wonder why they're very pissed off. Because all we've been doing for the past few years is saying that you, as a brown Muslim man, are a threat. You are a massive problem. And it's only sort of after we've gone, oh, do you know what? Maybe that's not a great way of approaching this. How can we win these people back to a sense of rationality?
Mm-hmm.
That we sort of said, all right, maybe we should tone it down just a little bit. And then that sort of got displaced onto uh, sort of focusing on whiteness. And so you've got these might have some very vulnerable young men who, like I said, are very unsure about their place in the world, now getting told by a lot of the institutions that actually your sense of whiteness, your sense of masculinity is inherently harmful. You are an inherent threat.
Mm-hmm.
And it's only going to take so much before people start going, well, okay, yeah, if I'm supposed to be the bad guy, I'll be the bad guy. And I don't know if you've heard of him, but Andrew Tate, for example,
Yeah,
is
yeah.
really rebuilding that sort of sense of the bad. Well, he's building up the bad boy manosphere. He's sort of saying, do you know what? If the world's going to hate me as a bloke, I'm going to be a bloke. I'm going to fuck bitches and get money, and I'm going to make a great living while doing it.
Mhm.
Try and stop me. What can you say? He's found a gap in the market and he's pursuing it.
Yeah, I mean, well, yeah, I mean, so what do you think? Okay, so you guys are doing all this research, you're collecting all of this. Is there, and it's obviously not your place to make a suggestion on how to fix it, but where does this go? Like, how do we as a society fix this? Because I don't have a voice. This interview doesn't have the voice that anybody on the far extremes of either of these sides are. And it's like this weird thing where it's like we're talking about the mainstream media is giving these opinions, which is causing these people to go into these kind of like hidey holes. But the hidey holes are starting to have massive, massive appeal. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like it's like Andrew Tate's got millions of views, and forget him. I'm talking about the guys who are like, what were the numbers that you sent me on about Telegram? Just like the
Oh,
sheer
right. Yeah, yeah.
volume of millions of people who are in these like little like recesses of the internet doing horrible things.
I think the most startling bit that I found, and the I'm aiming to get the project published by the end of August. Might be mid-September, but around that time. But one of the most startling things was that the far right Telegram network, and this was a network that I designed to purely focus on the far right. So not your average user who might have gone on just to laugh at some funny memes and talk about people who are producing content in this sphere.
Mm-hmm.
It rose to about 5,000 central channels by the end of 2021. Between 2017 and 2020, that network had 2 billion views. So that's not bad over a good few years.
Yeah.
2021, that shot up to over 11 billion views.
So that's 5
And
billion in 1 year.
yeah,
So it's 5 billion views on this content in 1 year. And this is and what is uh, are you kind of under the impression that these are not people, these are people being radicalized because they're not getting their opinions in any way, shape, or form catered to. So they're finding radicalization gradually.
I wouldn't I wouldn't go so far as to say that. I'd say these are people who are engaged in a radical milieu. There is this space is a radical space. It is a space full of misinformation.
Mm-hmm.
My big concern is that you will get people who are quite vulnerable. They might have mental health issues. They might not be in the best place in their life. Hell, their girlfriend might have left them, and they're trying to find something to fill the void. They're engaged in this space. And the thing is with Telegram is that there's a sense of authentic curation around the content. So what you see is based on who you follow, and you can start following one channel that recommends another channel that
Mm-hmm.
recommends another channel.
It's like
So you
anything
can
else.
well, you say that, but Twitter and Facebook at the moment is more algorithmic. You will get shown things based on what the algorithm wants to show you. Like the other
Mm-hmm.
day, I was scrolling through Twitter, and Twitter recommended me a tweet from one of the English ladies football team, one of the ladies on there. I don't do soccer. I don't care about soccer, men's soccer, women's soccer. I don't care. But for some reason, Twitter decided that I really needed to see this post from one of the members of England's ladies football team. So you don't get that on Telegram. What you get is what the channel owner wants to see, and if you've had enough of that, you just scroll on to another channel, scroll on to another channel. So you can really get yourself down a rabbit hole. And also, what we're seeing emerge now in the wider sphere is what's called conspirituality. So
Mm-hmm.
it is blending conspiracy theories with a sense of new age spiritualism. So things like energies and
Well, I mean,
realigning your chakra, but also twinning that in with a sense of uh, you know everything is evil, there are demons that are actually at work and they're trying to manipulate your energy. So it's stuff that is really appealing to people.
Well, there's also, I mean, that exists in Nazism. I mean, I don't
Yeah,
know if you know anything about the Order of the Nine Angles.
not
Uh,
specifically about them, but I do know that there was a heavy occult element to
no,
the
no, no.
Nazis.
I'm talking about modern Nazism.
Oh no, I
Like
no idea.
there's a branch off of Atomwaffen, which I don't think which is a funny thing about like information is like everybody knows about the Proud Boys. I've talked about that on the show a lot, where it's like nobody knows about these guys who are actually like terrifyingly dangerous. They know about the Proud Boys who are kind of silly. You know what I mean? Like it's and so, but they don't know about. There's a division of Atomwaffen called the Order of the Nine Angles that believes that the white race will inherit the universe and invade space. Like, and it has like aspects of demonology involved in it. And I like read a little bit about it and I was like, this is a little much for me. I'm going to take a step back.
I'm done. Yeah, I've
Yeah.
reached my limit.
All right. All right. Yeah. And it's, so there is that. And it does appeal to people because people want to believe. I think there is this thing, whatever. There's a larger, broader talk of religion not existing the way it should in our brains anymore. People want to believe. That's why people believe conspiracy theories. That's why people believe in aliens. That's why people believe in Bigfoot. They want the world to be more than the four walls of their house and their job.
Yeah, and but then that's the thing as well. You know, if you've got a mate who believes in Bigfoot and he spends the weekend going out Bigfoot hunting, is he doing any harm? Him and his pals, they take their truck to the woods, they walk around the woods for a bit, and then they come home. Stuff like that is not a problem, and it is trying to find the healthy way to indulge and engage in the fantastic and the mythology and stuff like that. And I think that some of that is a big pushback against, yeah, you've got Disney that sort of owns all of the mythology at the moment, and beyond that all of the sort of American cultural stories are now being framed in such a way as to encourage division and encourage these arguments, and they're doing it because they think that they're doing the right thing, but it is just winding people up. At the same time, you've got this new form of podcasting. You've got new social media platforms that are sharing videos and this sort of content, and it is
Ooh.
brand new. It's exciting. It's novel, and it is selling mythology, and people want to engage in it.
Well, it's an interesting thing. It's like you said, it's like people think they're helping, but they're winding people up. It's this weird thing. It's like we'll take Joe Rogan for an example, right? Joe Rogan's very polarizing.
Mm-hmm.
But Joe Rogan, in and of himself, he might have some views you don't agree with, but he's not pushing Nazism or Jewish conspiracies.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But what people will do is they'll go, well, he talked to a guy who talked to a guy who believes this. And you go, so what?
Yeah.
Even if he talked to Alex Jones, who probably believes that shit, you got kind of go, so what? Like, here's the thing is like the people who are engaging with his content for 9 hours a week know Joe Rogan's not a piece of human garbage. You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? They just know he's a guy who's curious. That's the whole fucking thing. But if you're calling him a piece of human garbage, well, we go, well, we know you're lying. It's everything that you go, well, we know you're all lying. And,
Yeah.
and it's so it's like, how do you convince the broader world that thinks they're helping that they're hurting and pushing these people into these places and making things worse? Or do they need that boogeyman anyway? Do they, like, that's the thing is like, that's where my brain starts going. Do they need this boogeyman? Are they doing this on purpose? And that's irrational.
Well, yeah, no, because the thing is the similar systems are at play for that side of things. You know, they need to be sold their mythologies, and they need to be sold their way of viewing the world, very much so the same way that the people in the more radical right sphere of things need to be sold that. And what has really fallen out of public discourse is this sense of, look how far we've actually come. I mean, I'm thinking back to Opie and Anthony and things like that. Hilarious, don't get me wrong, absolutely hilarious. But in inviting women into the recording studio and putting a wiffle bat in them, yeah, maybe not the greatest of moves, but things like that aren't really happening anymore. We're not seeing that on Joe Rogan. If Rogan was to have a sex worker on his podcast, it would be to discuss what it means to be a sex worker today,
Mhm.
not to exploit the situation as such.
Yeah, even the podcasts, I forget, there's one that keeps showing up in my feed that is a podcast where they interview porn chicks.
Hmm.
And it really is just talking to them and letting them say like naughty stuff. It's and like getting stories from them. Like there was one girl who told the story of it was similar to a Gamergate thing where she was like, "Yeah, I had to fuck this many dudes at Instagram to get my Instagram account get back."
Mm.
But that's just a story. That's not that's not a wiffle ball bat challenge. That's not, you know what I mean? Like it's which is yeah, exactly. We have made progress, I guess, in that sense of the word. We're like the Man Show was rated TV PG. And I mean, look, the Man Show is pretty PG, but it's also incredibly misogynistic. You know what I mean? Like it's like we could probably live. You want to have that conversation? That's fucking fine. But then once you delve into the male gaze is literally violence, shut up.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, just going back to sort of because I've been playing video games for my life, and I remember, you know, you would say the most horrendous things to people on the Xbox Live lobby, and to use the word raped would be normal. You know, if you beat your mate at a fighting game, you're like, ah, bruv, I just raped you, and then people start going, actually, do you know what? We get it that you're kind of palling about here, but it's kind of a serious thing, and it sort of just died out. It naturally went away. Same as using gay. Same as going, oh mate, you're so gay, stop it. What was it? Seth, I think it was Seth Rogen in one of his movies. The joke was, do you know how I know you're gay? Implying that being gay was something bad.
That was the 40-year-old virgin. That was the 40
Yeah,
year old, which is a celebrated movie.
yeah, and okay, was not great, but that sort of nomenclature has gone out of the public discourse, and it's allowing things to sort of just naturally peter out, allowing people to go, all right, do you know what? Yeah, okay, that's not a great move. We'll work on it. But it's a sense now that people feel forced to improve, forced to walk this fine line.
Well, I'm
And
remiss to
having to
say
be
this, but
perfect.
there was a study that I'm remiss to bring this up because what I just was making fun of the studies for. There was a study that I was reading a few weeks ago where it was people who say that they go out of their way to be more politically correct at work suffer from deeper mental exhaustion.
Mm.
And I'm not talking about black people who have to deal with microaggressions. I'm talking about like this is like white people who go out of their way to not offend ever and like really put a focus on it, suffer extreme like further mental exhaustion than their coworkers.
Oh yeah, yeah. There's no way that you could be that vigilant about what you're trying to say. Even in our conversation today, there's as I'm saying things in the back of my mind, I'm going, that could be taken so out of context. Someone could really, really,
Oh,
really want
I'm
to be
gonna.
offended.
I'm gonna. Don't worry.
But it's one of those things that you couldn't have a conversation if you were so worried about tripping over what you're
Mm.
trying to say. And that is one of the things that has fallen by the wayside, or at least in my opinion, is that sense of forgiveness, is that sense of what's the word I'm looking for? Just not taking everything to be the worst possible way that it could be intended. It is giving people the benefit of the doubt. That's it.
I think about it as we're all kind of using corporate doublespeak and acting like we're all kind of. So I always say this about in New York City, the Board of Health writes the regulations as if every cook is trying to murder every single one of his customers. Like
Yeah.
that's how they're just it's a revenue stream. But we all kind of view the world that way now. Like not we all, but it seems to be, and I don't even know, maybe most people probably aren't actually like this, but it seems to be that there's a large amount of like mob mentality online where there's never forget there's no forgetting or whatever like and people seem to be okay with being a part. I always say this: if you have a tweet that you're going to write where you want to cancel somebody, before you hit send, take an envelope, write an address on it, and just walk to a mailbox. Don't put it in the mailbox.
Yeah.
But if you're not willing to do that, you probably shouldn't hit send on that tweet.
Yeah, very much so. It is. That's one of the other things that really isn't being discussed is the impact that social media does have on people's psychologies.
Hmm.
Yes, we know that the people get outraged and things like that, but when does your social media use become problematic? Over here in the UK, we have gambling. It's totally legal. I know there's issues over there in the US, and
Hmm.
we run big adverts on the TV that sort of says when the fun stops, stop. You know, when if you gamble, if you're starting to get to the point that you're losing money and it's not an enjoyable experience, stop doing it. But we don't talk about social media in similar ways.
Hmm.
There tends to be this idea that social media is pretty much just interactive TV. It is a content delivery system. It's not. It is its own information ecosystem. If you go on Twitter, it has its own rules. If you go on Facebook, it has its own rules. Kiwi Farms has its own rules, and even within subdomains, they had their own rules of social organization. They are very small networked communities. I don't like saying that online is a community, but it does have very particular ways of operating behind them.
Hmm.
So Twitter isn't just a social media platform. For some people, it is very much a massive part of their life.
Hmm.
And as with anything in your life, you need to look back on it and ask yourself, is this harmful for me? You know, if you're sitting there slamming 6 beers a night, you're going to get to the point and you go, do you know what? I need to knock this on the head. This is not doing me any good. And we know that. We know that about booze. We know that about drugs. You know, we know if you're sitting there snorting rails of coke every night, that maybe you should knock it on the head a bit or become a comedian. One of the
Hmm.
two.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Those are your two options. You can. Okay. I mean, I feel like we've covered a lot of. Is there anything else that we've maybe left out that you want to cover?
No. There's always more to talk about.
Okay.
But we could be sitting here discussing things all night. So
Yeah, I mean, I can keep going through. I before to tell people who are listening to this. Before this, I mentioned a couple of examples to you that I wanted to get to. Actually, one thing I will talk to you about is the Ukraine in a second. But for people who are listening to this, there were examples that I'm not even going to go into that were examples of misinformation because I know you study the right end of it, but there were examples of misinformation on the left that I wanted to talk about. But I feel like we've kind of covered the problematic aspect of the information over there. But I do want to talk to you about what is exactly the issue with the Ukraine war, and is that's also affected the Telegram sphere? And is
uh,
it and is it and is there so like a lot of people are coming after DuckDuckGo right now because they said they were going to de-rank sites that they know have ties to Russian media because Russian media is essentially an arm of propaganda.
yeah.
And I still think that DuckDuckGo is a better product when it comes to looking. So, for things that I wanted to refresh myself on before this interview, I use DuckDuckGo to find them from 8 to 10 years ago, before like rather than Google. Because it's just Google is here's today's narrative. Here's the it's framed as far as it goes for doing research for shit like this. We're framing this way. Here you go. So with the Ukrainian war, what have you seen in these far right spheres? Because I've seen people now. Obviously, I've known people who are of Russian descent who have kind of been like, "Yeah, I kind of agree with what they're saying over there." And I know guys who are Ukrainian who are like, "It's pretty crazy that people keep asking me how I feel about Ukraine. It's like the only reason I live here is because of how anti-Semitic Ukraine was." And then like Putin is kind of playing on that, but
Yep.
where does that exist on the spectrum of information versus misinformation in these spheres?
Yeah, that is definitely a question. And that's the thing. There is such a literal fog of war when it comes to the information. It's almost impossible to unearth what is authentic information.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the reasons why Telegram was very popular on the onset of the war, because the Western news channels were very much saying, well, they weren't saying, but it was very much along the lines of, no, we are backing Ukraine in this war. And perhaps if they had come out and said, we are backing Ukraine, we are going to give them positive coverage because we don't like Russia. That might have helped issues, but it's where there's this idea that the news is a neutral arbiter of truth. And people were seeing things like the Ghost of Kiev story that was going around, and
which was very fake.
people go, that's fake news, that is propaganda. We know that's pro-Ukraine propaganda. But because no one's admitting that, they're going, well, now I want to start looking for the proper information. And people know that the Russian news is pro-Russian propaganda, but that's established. So they go, okay, well, where else can I now look for authentic information? That would be places like Telegram. There was a lot of stuff there. Several big news channels. Well, actually, there weren't news channels. Several big channels that was putting out information, and it was putting out information without comment. It was just basically saying, "This is a video from this place in Ukraine. Make of it what you will." However, that being said, it's unknown where that actually comes from. How was those bits of information manipulated or not? But because those channels are presenting themselves as being the alternative news or like an alternative news network, they gathered themselves a sense of authenticity. So it's very, very, very difficult to unpick.
Okay, so all right, so with that, so there's this Americentric view that the Western news has kind of had of like, there was a lot of saber rattling from the Biden administration in the lead up to this, which our European allies were kind of anti. Ukraine was. Zelensky was talking against the Biden administration, but it was never talked about here. And it's one of these things like what I was talking about with the Trump stuff. Now, again, I probably wasn't going to go seek out more information on Telegram. I saw a lot of videos. I saw cool army videos on Twitter. That was enough for me. And I can discern what I'm seeing and I kind of understand what's going on. But like the fact that I was having these conversations with people where I'm going, I don't think the US should be saber rattling in the Baltics. It's like, oh, so like these are Putin talking points. Like, no, they're not. I just think we should listen to Zelensky because he's the president of the place. And that was in the beginning. And then people going, see, they did invade. I was like, well, how much of that has to do with the saber rattling? We're not even having that conversation. How much of that has to do with the gradual buildup of NATO since the end of the Soviet Union? We're allowed that. We should have that conversation. Like, while still at the same time being like, okay, let's try to calm this down so that a lot of Ukrainians don't die.
Yeah, and
absolutely remove the fucking crazy anti-Semitic rhetoric that's coming out of the Russian shit. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and that was one of my big criticisms about coverage. Maybe not so much in the early opening phases, because that was always going to be heavily emotional and very shocked. But there wasn't a real big push of getting historians and military strategists to sit on the news and say, this is how Russia does war. This is what war looks like according to Russia. This is their doctrine. This is how they work. You got a lot of that on Telegram, a lot of that in the sort of radical misinformation spheres, but there really wasn't much of that on Telegram.
So you get
on mainstream media.
So you get the kernel of information, right? So that's real information, right? So you get this kernel of misinformation, this kernel of true information. And then because the pundits there are, as you said before, irresponsible, they build on this to create this further narrative that moves their agenda and helps them make money.
Yeah, very much so. Or if not money, then Twitter followers, likes, social media, kudos, all of that stuff, because there is that at play as well, which we can't forget. That there may be people who support one narrative or support another because it gets them positive regard on other social media platforms. And at some point, you can start leveraging your Twitter account into a revenue stream or a job opportunity or something like that.
Anything is monetizable nowadays. Literally anything.
So there's so many different layers to the media ecosystem at the moment, which we didn't have when it was TV and radio. But we seem to still think that the internet works like TV and radio. It's just a simple information delivery system. But there are so many factors at play.
Okay. All right. So I think we've pretty much, so Dr. M Rook, at Dr. M Rook on Twitter. Is there any other social media? That's it.
That's it. I try and keep myself off it as much as possible.
And where can people follow the entire project if they want to keep updated?
Follow me on Twitter. Once that project is all done and finalized and the report is out, I'll definitely link it on there.
All right, fantastic. Really great talking to you. Glad we could do this. We've been talking about doing it for a while, but great conversation. And again, Dr. M Rook on Twitter. Go follow that. Thanks, man.
Thank you very much for having me.